Hi, it's Deborah Carter here with Preparation Tech. Preparation Tech is a video interview series which helps you to prepare the young people and children in your life for the careers and study paths of the future. Today we are speaking with Avesta Rastan in Toronto. Avesta is very interesting. I came across her because she made this amazing infographic that explained how COVID-19 affects your body. And I started to do research about her and come to find out that she's an illustrator and an animator who specializes in explaining complex technology and science through visualization. And this is an important career that kids should know about, especially kids who are interested in arts and creating and drawing and technical drawing. So let's just take it away. Avesta, welcome. Can you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Avesta, as you mentioned, and I was born and raised in Vancouver, Canada, and I'm now currently living in Toronto. And I call myself a scientific visualization specialist. So I'm currently a full-time freelance biomedical animator and illustrator. And previously, I did work in industry. So I worked for a company called Biomedical Communications, which is a medical communications agency. And what that basically means, because a lot of people aren't familiar with that, is they'll work with big pharma and biotech and help to communicate their science, whether that's in applications like iPad apps, web apps, or animation, or conference booths, things like that. And now, obviously I'm freelance now, so I kind of do a lot of different little things, which I can dive into more in detail later. And I got my professional training at the University of Toronto in the Master of Science in Biomedical Communications program, which is one of 4 accredited programs in North America that teaches medical animation and medical illustration.
Great. So you talk a lot about science and medicine, but there's a lot of technology involved. Are you also communicating how technology works, or is it mostly science in the medical industry?
Yeah, so it really, I primarily do more so of the science side, but I do also sometimes work with startups who say they have a new patented device or a new technology to offer for patients suffering from a certain condition or something like that. So in those cases, it will be more so showing how technology works, but I also use technology to create the work that I do every day. So it's a little bit of both.
Awesome. So let's talk really specifically about your beautiful COVID-19 illustration. Now, I understand that the World Economic Forum picked it up and it garnered over 2 million views. So this is huge because you educated over 2 million people about COVID-19. Tell us a bit about this infographic. What was the creative process behind producing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So back in March, when COVID-19 was officially declared a pandemic, I started realizing, the severity of this, and I was trying really hard to keep up with the, constant influx of research and articles about it. And, there was so much information, and I started to realize that I wasn't seeing many visual resources on how it actually affects you. So, there was 3D models of the virus itself. There's the classic one with the red spikes that everyone is familiar with now. And, little things like that showed the virus, but I didn't really see much about how it actually affected the body. And, that's what people really care about, because they want to know, like, oh, why is this dangerous? Why do I have to take preventative measures? So the more I thought about it, the more I realized, I have a unique skill set that could help address this communication gap. And, with my skills, I figured I could use them to help in my own way with this pandemic, because, everyone's trying to do their part. And I felt like this was mine. So that was kind of the inspiration. So once I decided I wanted to show how it affects the human body, I did lots of research. So I read many articles, many papers, and just basically took in as much information as I could, to really understand it and understand what is the most relevant information, what are people going to care about. And then once I understood that, then I planned out how I wanted to visualize that on the page. And I knew I wanted to make it publicly accessible. So, you know, I posted it on Twitter when it was finished, and that's where it really blew up. And I was actually like, I remember when I first posted it, I thought it was going to get like under 100 likes or 100 views. And that was very wrong. And I think what made it really impactful for people and interesting was, most people don't have the time or the energy to sort through all of that information. And, it was also a lot of text. It wasn't much images. So it's a hard task to summarize that. And, I made it a personal challenge of mine to try and do it. So I think that was like one of the main factors, was that it summarized a lot of information on a single page so that people didn't have to, jump around to a bunch of articles themselves. And not only that, but I tried to, word it and present it in a way that is, free of scientific jargon and understandable to the public. And it might have still been a little bit more technical than I meant it to be, but I think it was, understandable enough that people picked it up and shared it with others. So, and the last thing I think is also the use of storytelling. So if you just show an image with no context, it's not going to have impact. You need to tell a story with it. So, in this case, you have the virus, that's the main character. You introduce the virus, you say, this is what the virus is, this is how it affects you, and here's what you can do to prevent yourself from catching it. And that's how I presented it. And I think, I guess that was an effective way to do it.
Awesome. Awesome. So when I'm talking to you, I hear a woman who loves art, who loves drawing, animation, and I also hear someone who's completely interested in science and technology, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about your journey, your path. Take us back all the way to your childhood. What kind of child were you? What did you like to do? How did you combine your hobbies and your schooling to become this amazing illustrator and animator?
Yeah, that's, a long story, because it really, spans over my whole life. Going way back to elementary school, and, when I started to actually remember things, my father, at the time when I was younger, he was working in the physics department at a local university. And my mom, she was in environmental sciences, and she was also an artist. Like, I remember seeing her paintings in our house, and I always thought she was like such a great artist. She was really inspiring to me from that standpoint. And then some of my fondest memories growing up was, going to the university and playing in the physics lab. And my dad would show us all these different experiments and stuff, and, like sticking a coin in dry ice and seeing it vibrate, and then, freezing things with liquid nitrogen. And I would also try and make little circuits and turn lights on and off and things like that. So I was really lucky that I had that opportunity to go into the lab and experience those things. And then also, growing up in Vancouver, I was always surrounded by nature. There was literally a forest in my backyard. So I would go out and look for bugs and look for animals. Like, I loved all creatures. Like, I had a book of insects, and I would, when I found one, I would look through my book and try and figure out which one it was. So I think, my love for science was really natural, the way I was brought up. And for the artistic side, I can't really pinpoint a specific memory or time where I realized, oh, I love art. It was, I think, a more intrinsic quality. I just always enjoyed it. I would draw from a really young age. And it wasn't, I think it was, grade 4 or 5 where I started getting more into painting. And I think back in grade 5, I actually won like a national art competition for drawing a sunflower. And that was like really cool for me. And then I got to like travel to Jasper and be in more nature and learn about animals. And so like that was a fond memory. And then, yeah, I continued to paint throughout high school. I did actually a pre-professional art program in high school where it basically taught you art more in depth, and I did a lot more painting, and most of my artwork was really inspired by scientific concepts. So I think specifically, I would notice and observe patterns in nature, and there's a lot of beautiful patterns in nature, like how, for example, things like neurons, also the neural networks look very similar to road systems, and the veins in our body look very similar to tree roots, and I would see these patterns, and then that would inspire my artwork. And that's kind of, I guess, how I developed my artistic interests. And I did do a lot of art programs on the side, because my parents realized that I liked art and put me in like art classes and stuff, so I'm lucky for that as well. And I think lastly, from the technology standpoint, that didn't really develop until later, once I started to actually realize the impact technology can have. So I think especially in the last 3 years, my interest in technology have increased a lot. And I could talk about it for a while, but I can give some examples of what inspires me from a technology standpoint. So there was actually a time back in grade 12 when I was trying to pick my path and determine where to go to university, and I considered being an aeronautical engineer for a while, because I always was fascinated by how planes worked and how something so heavy could soar through the sky and lift all these people. So that was something I was really interested in. And then biomedical engineering was something I developed more of an interest in later. And actually one of my good friends, she studied how brain-computer interfaces can be used to help kids with disabilities communicate their thoughts, because often they don't have the means to express themselves with words or with physical actions. So if you can use directly like tap into their brain to figure out how they're thinking, obviously this is research that's still going on, that's something that can have a huge impact on someone. And there's so many technologies and devices that improve the quality of life of people, and that kind of thing. So that's a big one. And then one more thing I want to mention from a technology standpoint that a lot of people, I think, kind of overlook because they don't necessarily understand its implications is VR and AR. So a lot of people, when they hear like virtual reality and augmented reality, they're like, oh, it's just like a trend that might not last. It's like just flashy. But most people don't actually get the chance to try these technologies themselves. And in my past job at Invivo, I got the chance to really explore these and using those for medical education, which is something I never even thought that VR could be used for. So, one company, for example, they train surgeons using VR. So, often patients don't want a new surgeon to practice on them. So if you can practice in VR, you can develop those skills without, using up the time of the patients and also the time of higher level physicians. Also in terms of remote collaboration, with the pandemic in the future, if people can, if they have VR headsets that are more developed, we could collaborate in the same room, but virtually. And there's so many potentials that VR and AR can bring us that we haven't really realized yet. So that's kind of another interest.
And just to follow up on your last point about VR and AR, what was your connection? How did you come into this whole discourse? Were you designing infographics, like trading materials, or what were you doing?
Yeah, so actually I learned about it more so in my master's studies. So in my master's, we did some industry tours where we'd go around to studios in Toronto, and we also just would learn about, current standards in the medical illustration field. And also, I don't really like calling it the medical illustration field because it's not just illustration. It's so many things. It's a lot of people do specific things in VR and AR, or they do web development or user interface design and user experience design. It's very broad. So going through my master's, I was exposed to all these new technologies and new opportunities that I wasn't aware of before. And a lot of the studios were using, VR headsets for like 3D experiences for teaching someone about a medical concept. So like say, for example, you want to teach someone heart anatomy. The heart is a really complex 3D organ. And if you could go into the heart in VR and explore like how blood flows and whatnot, that's, is going to be a much more memorable experience and give you a better feel for the actual structure versus just seeing illustrations of it. So that's one way like VR can be used. Or like I mentioned, surgical training, like I learned about that just through being in the industry and learning about what people are doing currently. So yeah, it's kind of just like absorbing what's going on in the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, you said that you went to U of T and this
Yeah,
biomedical communications. First of all,
yeah.
like, wow, when I read about this on your LinkedIn, I was like, what's that? Why haven't I heard of this before? Tell us a bit about your program. And if you could be pretty specific, because just to give folks an idea of
Mm-hmm.
what you actually studied during this kind of a degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was really lucky to stumble upon the BMC program because I didn't actually realize this was its own field until, at the end of my third year, I was freaking out about my future and what I wanted to do. And I mean, that's a whole other story, but I'm really lucky in that one of my friends, she knew I was interested in both the arts and the sciences, and she found this program and she sent it to me. And at the time I was considering like neuroscience masters or staying in academia or potentially doing going to medical school, which I ended up learning that's definitely not the path for me. But I'm glad she found this program and sent it to me. And I applied and luckily got in my first try. But essentially what the program is, biomedical communications, people think maybe like verbal communication, but basically you take intensive courses in the sciences and in technical art skills. So in the first couple of years, or in the first year, for example, we did an anatomical dissection class. So we had a cadaver lab where we'd go and dissect the body and learn about all the different parts, and we would draw them as well in our sketchbooks. And then we also did things like pathology, molecular biology, neuroanatomy, classes like that, because to depict something visually, scientifically, you need to really understand the science. So it was a lot of classes like that. And then alongside those, in the first year, we did more traditional art techniques. So we learned like different techniques that the founders of medical illustration would use, like carbon dust painting. And then we learned more digital techniques like using Photoshop and using Adobe Illustrator and things like that. And then in your second year, you pick one of two streams. So there's the animation stream, 3D animation specifically, and then there is the interactive media stream. So I did the 3D animation stream, which I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. So we learned 3D animation alongside also still other art courses. And basically 3D animation for the medical field is, you're collaborating with researchers to show their research using animation. So I worked with, it's called Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, and they did this brand new research on how this type of childhood brain cancer can travel through your body, which has huge implications for treatment for this cancer and management of the disease. So it was really important for them to get the word out that this is a thing. And like, so for both the public, for parents, and for, well, not so much for the children because it would be more complex, but for the parents of children and for people in the field in general and like brain cancer, this was a way for them to learn about this new research. And that was a really cool experience. And then on the other side, the interactive media, this is more so like user interface and user experience design, as well as educational gaming. So, a lot of people love video games, for example, and you can use that to educate people. So like some of my classmates, they basically developed all the design material for a game to help educate people on a specific scientific topic, or create an app to educate like kinesiology students on how different muscle groups work and actual real world applications of that. So there's a lot of different things. I don't know if that's as specific as you want me to be.
This
I can dive more in detail.
No, this is perfect because it's to give it a, basically what I was hoping you would say and what you did was it's a combination of scientific knowledge and skills, but also artistic knowledge and skills. And when you
Exactly.
combine them, it makes for an amazing, amazing field, which I think is going to just explode in the future because
Oh yeah.
visual storytelling around technology and science is so critical. And we've just only started scratching the surface with this.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's actually, just a little extra note. So something that I recently learned was Toy Story was the first ever produced 3D animated movie, and that was in 1995. And so that's only 25 years old. And so we're only just scratching the surface of, what 3D animation and 3D software is capable of. And, I'm really excited to see where this field goes in the future because its capabilities are just going to increase. And, I'm hoping that, visual communication of science becomes the new industry standard for academia and for, the healthcare system.
Awesome. I hope so too. I hope so too.
Yeah.
My next question is, what kind of person thrives in biomedical and technology communication? What's the mindset and what are the characteristics that a person would need to be successful in this field?
That's a good question. So, I mean, the obvious ones are, first and foremost, interest in both sciences and arts. And, that's pretty general. And I think part of, being in this field is having general interests. And that was something I always struggled with was I never felt like I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I loved everything. I wanted to do everything. And I think this field is a great fit for people like that because you're constantly learning and you're constantly doing new things. And that kind of leads me to the next point is curiosity. I think that's probably the biggest trait that is really important in this field is you have to be curious because you're not the one necessarily doing novel research, but you're helping people communicate their research or communicate new technology that they've developed. So you need to be curious so that you can learn about that and then figure out the best way to communicate that. So, I mean, that's part of my favorite, one of my favorite things about this field is constantly learning. Other than that, I think it's definitely easier to come into this field with a strong science background as opposed to an art background and then learning the science. I know there are people who do it who have an arts background and then they take science courses and then get into the program. But it's definitely, I think from a knowledge scaffolding point of view, learning the science, that teaches you how to problem solve and how to use logic and how to break things down into components. And that is so critical in this field. And from an artistic point of view, you learn more so how to be creative and how to express things. And once you know how to break down something, then you can figure out how to express that. And they go hand in hand. But I do think that science first and art second is an easier way to balance that. But there's always exceptions, of course.
Great.
Yeah, and I think,
sorry.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I'm so sorry for interrupting.
No. Just like one last trait I think that is really important is, being adaptable because, like we mentioned, this field is evolving and I think it's going to expand a lot in the future. And, there are traditionalists in the field and we need those people, but you need to be also very adaptable to the times because, the science is rapidly evolving, technology is rapidly evolving. So you have to be, willing to learn new things all the time, it's a lot and it can be overwhelming, but I think it's a lot of fun once you know how to learn and then you just pick it up.
Absolutely. Learning how to learn is a critical 21st century.
Oh yeah. I think that's what I learned the most in the past few years.
Great. And it's a good lesson, which will
Yeah.
be useful throughout the rest of your life. What kind of professionals do you work with? Because I think I read somewhere you're working with Stanford professors, you're just with a whole bunch of different kinds of people.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I mentioned, I primarily work with, researchers and scientists in academia and healthcare. So, for example, if a researcher has, novel research, you mentioned Stanford. So I'm actually working with a researcher at Stanford who's doing COVID research. And I'm helping her visualize her findings. And, when you're submitting to an academic journal, you need figures to accompany it. And, I think collaborating with the medical illustrator is a great way to ensure your figures are, attractive, that they draw people's attention, and that they're also informative and educational. And then from the healthcare standpoint, I'm also currently collaborating with an ophthalmologist, so an eye surgeon he basically did this research on comparing these different surgical techniques for treating a specific condition in the eye. And he wanted to educate people in his field about the pros and cons of these different techniques. So we put together, a multi-part animated series about these different techniques, and then also one animation for patient education, which is also a big field in its own, is patient education. Because if you have a disease or a condition, or you have to go into a hospital for surgery, that can be really intimidating. And having educational materials that show you what they're going to do and show you the science behind it, it makes it a more enjoyable and more comfortable experience. And then other than, academics and healthcare workers, I did some pedagogical stuff in the past. So I worked with a university to develop images to accompany lecture content. And then now I'm also getting more involved with, like health tech startups. So working with entrepreneurs who have, patented some sort of technology, and they're pitching to investors, or they're pitching to physicians who would use this technology or something like that. And I will help them create, visuals that will go in their pitch decks to show how their technology works. And then, I also have worked with, veterinary communications. So, animal science is its own thing too. I don't do as much of that, but that's also interesting. And then lastly, collaborating with other creatives in my field. And, you have to work sometimes with, creative directors, art directors, other medical animators or illustrators. So, yeah.
Lots of different kinds of people. Awesome.
Yeah.
You know what I love about this interview, because I've done quite a few of these now, and what you're saying, what you've said, connects with so many other people I've interviewed. I'll name a few. We have Zubi Onwuta, who is a legally blind person who developed tech that magnifies. So it captures brain waves, and then through Google Glasses, it magnifies something so that somebody who's visually impaired can see. Ophthalmology.
Oh, that's so cool.
We interviewed Natalie Rafoul, who is one of Canada's leading IP and patent lawyers, you just mentioned, and also two people from the gaming industry, Yapi Savinter and Kate Edwards, who are in the gaming industry. And Kate actually is heads up a global organization, but I remember JP really talking a lot about how they're using gaming to train surgeons and stuff. So I just love how this all connects.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. My last question for you. Can you give some specific advice to parents, teachers, and school guidance counselors on how they can nurture passion in children who love art and science? And if you could be as specific as possible, because what we're looking for are tips and recommendations to really nurture that creative talent that a child has.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard question because, I haven't been a parent myself. So I did actually, talk to my dad about this because he raised 3 children. And, he was really saying that, the first 5 years of a child's life is really critical because that's when they're doing a lot of important brain development. So, I mean, this might be obvious, but, obviously exposing your child to a lot of different things in those early years, like, different kinds of music, languages, things like, different science books. Like I mentioned, I had that insect book that I love, like things like that. That just like different kinds of arts and sciences, I think you can introduce naturally and, nurture their curiosity. And I think that's a big thing too, is that children are naturally curious. So you don't have to teach them how to want to learn. They already want to learn. So, I think a big thing is if they're asking questions, if they're say they ask like, oh, why does this butterfly have this pattern? Or why is that butterfly's pattern different than that butterfly? And if you don't know, which is totally okay, then, you can, pretend to be researchers together and research it, go on Google and figure out why that is the case, actually, nurture their curiosities and, don't just kind of brush it off. And I think that, for me, I had a lot of that growing up. And I think that, I learned to question the world and to want to find answers for that. And I mean, also, I think a great example is, what you're doing with New Tech Kids, signing up for after school programs and, art classes out of school or tech programs. There's so many options online now. And, I'm not the best person to specify specific ones because, as someone without a kid, I don't really know what's really relevant. I know there's opportunities, but I think, Google is very handy and you can find anything on there. So a lot of research on that, I think, would be useful. I think also, other than that, when people start going like late elementary school to high school, that's when they start to learn that science is hard and they start to be influenced by other people more. So I think in those years, it's more important to encourage them to, basically keep doing what they're doing and, make sure they stay involved in, certain activities. And, like, I know I was enrolled in a lot of different like language courses and then I didn't enjoy it and I dropped out, but like, I think it was still a good experience to know what I liked and what I didn't like and, music lessons, things like that. I think another one that is, often overlooked, but is super accessible and free is YouTube. There are so many science communicators on YouTube who produce really amazing content that is, they make it fun as well. It's not just like, oh, here's science. It's like, okay, let's build a robot that pours water for you, or I don't know, something like random like that. And they go into the science behind that. So, people like the physics girl, Mark Rober, Adam Savage, ASAP Science, Kurtzka Sachs, like there's so many. I think that's a huge resource, and kids love watching things and animations, so that's a great way to educate them and in a way that's fun. There's also, I think, like one last important tip, I think, is reaching out to universities that have multidisciplinary programs and translational research programs, and trying to facilitate an outreach program with them, or get someone from their program to come give a talk, or an online seminar, something like that. Like there's specifically actually in the Netherlands, not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, but Zaid University, Z-U-Y-D. So they have a Master of Scientific Illustration program. So yeah, and there's also the, it's called AIMS, and it's the European Association of Medical Illustrators. They have a list of resources of people in the field. Like, if I'm sure if you reached out to people, also if you had an honorarium, I think that would help people do workshops. And I think that's something people don't realize they can do, is just reach out to people. And if there's not resources already, you can help create them yourself. Yeah, and I think the last thing that is, I think, really important is that there isn't a correct path. And the way I got to where I am now, which I love where I am now, and I get to learn so many cool things, but like for all of my life, I was always uncertain about what I was going to do next. I was always like, I like everything, like what am I going to do? And it wasn't clear to me. And then slowly, if you follow your curiosity, I think it will kind of lead you where you want to go anyway. So just, being aware of what your child's interests are and just nurturing that. And I think, it'll come naturally if you allow that to happen. But yeah, sorry, I can't like offer very specific like apps or anything, but I hope that helps.
It's fine, because your journey is the inspiration here. That's what we're talking about. And what I love about your interview is you keep saying one word over and over, and that is curiosity. I used to always think 21st century skills, like, problem solving, critical thinking. Yes, they are 21st century skills, but I'm hearing, the more I interview people, curiosity, it triumphs everything almost. And I think you're right. We have to really nurture kids' curiosity in things, because it's there where they need to go. You know, we just need to help them get there, kind of thing. So Avesta, thank you so much. This has been a fabulous interview, and thank you for educating me and the rest of the viewers about a profession we didn't necessarily know about. So I look forward to seeing more of your work, and I wish you a lot of success in the future.
Well, thank you. And thanks so much for organizing this. You know, it's a personal goal of mine to help inspire kids to learn about new career paths and do things like what I'm doing. So I think this is an awesome initiative.
Thank you.